Hey, I'm Mike Cermak from Tech Support Guy, and with me is Dan McCarthy.
Howdy ho.
And we're going to talk about iPhone 5 a little bit. The iPhone 5 just came out recently, and there's a lot of big news surrounding it. Some of the biggest news was the iOS6 itself, the software that runs on the iPhone. And of course, the biggest news with that was Maps. Apparently, the Google Maps has been replaced now with Apple's own map program. Apple and Google notoriously have not been getting along well, especially since Android came out. Steve Jobs famously said that it was a ripoff of the iPhone and that he's going to do everything he can to ruin Android. And that kind of, hasn't been a good time between the two companies ever since. So Apple's come up with their own mapping program that's in iOS 6, and the results are kind of, I don't know, disappointing. And to say the least, there's been a lot of reports of the program just not working well, that it shows addresses in the wrong place, it shows airports in the wrong city. There's just a lot of big bugs with it. One of the biggest complaints for people who do live in a city is that they've gotten rid of the functionality that allows you to see public transit. So you used to be able to bring up your Maps program and see how to get on the subway and which subway stop takes you where, and that's not in the new version of Maps from Apple. They say that functionality will be coming soon, though. Meanwhile, TomTom, who provides all the mapping data to Apple, made a statement saying it's not our fault. And Apple made a statement saying, be patient. We're working on it. It's our first release of a mapping program. And Google doesn't really need to say anything about it. I mean, Google's probably just sitting back and being happy and thinking that this is just one more way to make Android look a little bit better. I mean, you can almost see the Android users smirking a little bit at this whole thing while they use their full-featured Google Maps on their device. And there's even reports now of people trying to get Google Maps app back onto jailbroken iPhones. I mean, it's a serious problem.
Yeah. Motorola has not, or Google has not sat by the side with the removal of maps. They've actually released an ad that's kind of an attack on Apple for the maps removal. But as I understand, I don't own an iPhone or iOS device and don't use the Maps program. But what I understand is that it's a lack of data. So I find it odd that TomTom would say that it's not our fault when it appears to be a lack of data availability. And a GPS provider of some years now should have quite a store of data on mass transit and GPS in general.
I found, you're right, TomTom obviously has a lot of data, and I assume it's relatively accurate. Who knows exactly where all of these mistakes are coming in? I mean, Apple obviously is doing a lot more with the data than what TomTom ever has. They're trying to do all this new 3D stuff. And did you try the 3D? I don't know if you've even tried iOS 6 yet, Dan, but the 3D buildings is kind of cool, but also kind of distorted and they don't look right. And the only city I could find that actually had the 3D buildings in it was New York City. I tried D.C. and Pittsburgh and a bunch of other big cities, and the only one I could find was New York City, and it was kind of cool, but it was also very slow, even on Wi-Fi. But anyhow, and I think people will agree that the more important function is actually having a mapping system that will give you directions to where you want to go accurately.
Yes.
Accurately.
Yes. Now, Mike, do you know, have they removed Google Maps entirely from the market? From iTunes?
Yes, my understanding is that it is removed from the market because it was never in the market. It was a
A default.
and it's not. First of all, it's not market. This is Apple device. It's the store, the App Store, and it was a default installed app, so it really didn't show up in the store other than as updates. So it's not available to install manually anymore, or it never was, and it also isn't now. So you really are stuck. But there are people who have come up with ways, if you have a jailbroken phone, to install the old version of the app. And there's rumors as to whether or not Google is going to release a version of Google Maps for the iPhone. And if they do try to do that, there's rumors as to whether or not Apple will allow them to and will approve it to be in the App Store.
I think that's dangerous territory for Apple to revoke a valid app from their store. But they do own the store.
They do. Well, and we've seen them do that in the past whenever they had a much more stringent policy about no competing apps. So if you wrote an app that competed directly with an app that was already on the device standard, generally Apple would not allow it. But they've kind of come back on that a little bit.
Sure, sure. I expect they're going to be forced to. This is more along the lines of Steve Jobs' thermonuclear comment
That's
against
exactly
Google.
what he said. He's going to go thermonuclear on Google for coming up with this Android.
Yep, yep. I think that we're just seeing kind of last wishes seen to with this.
I like the ad here that you sent as well. It's kind of a dirty ad. And
Yeah.
it has pound I lost on one side, and it has new Apple map, which doesn't show you much of anything, and then it shows the Droid one. And I wonder who. This is actually an ad from Motorola, not from Google themselves, but still, it's kind of dirty.
And just to be clear, Motorola is now a subsidiary of Google.
Ooh, well played, sir. Well played.
Yeah.
I did not think of that whatsoever.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Google didn't want to come out and do it on their own, so they're just going to have their subsidiary do it, and then they can claim they didn't know anything about it.
Sure. Sure.
All right, well, moving right along. So the big story is the iPhone 5. Everyone's super excited about it. We had lots of people waiting in line for days, well, maybe a day, to get it. And tell me about it, Dan. I can't wait to hear about how exciting, how revolutionary this new iPhone is.
I really expected this phone to be revolutionary. You do expect that from Apple. You expect them to release, when they come out with a new phone, you expect significant changes in the phone. And the iPhone 5 is definitely a letdown there. Compared to the iPhone 4, it has an A6 dual-core processor running at 1,000 megahertz. That's different from the A4 processor that was in the iPhone 4, which was a single-core processor. It has double the RAM, and the camera is moderately better, going from 5 megapixels to 8 megapixels and full 1080p. So the iPhone 4 is 3.5 inches, and the iPhone 5 is 4 inches. So you get a half inch, which on a phone is somewhat considerable, but I don't know that it's revolutionary. The battery in the iPhone 5 is a little bit bigger, but the total time is actually gone down from 12.5 hours to 8 hours of talk time. The other significant development within the iPhone 5 is that it does support LTE. So that is important if you live in one of 6 metropolitan areas that actually have.
But that will grow. I mean, there'll be more and more areas that actually have LTE. And for those who don't know, LTE allows you to have a much faster data connection through cellular. So that will be important eventually. But right now, for most people, it just isn't.
AT&T is still the only carrier that allows both talk and data to occur at the same time. Verizon doesn't have that, nor does Sprint, which are the 3 major carriers that are carrying the iPhone 5. There are other smaller carriers that will be getting. Cricket, for example, will be getting the iPhone 5 through one of the larger, although I'm not sure which of the larger carriers will be providing that service to Cricket. The rumor is that the Verizon version of the iPhone 5 actually allows you to load an AT&T card into it and work on AT&T frequencies. So the Ars Technica review that I saw on this said that their recommendation would be to go with the Verizon version of the phone because Verizon has a larger LTE frequency range than AT&T does. So no downside if you get the iPhone 5 at cost, mind you, from Verizon and don't like the service there and you want to move to get the data and voice with AT&T.
Yep. Well, and there was an interesting article about that. They tried to get a comment from Verizon about the fact that the Verizon version of the phone allows you to switch to AT&T, put an AT&T SIM card into it, and Verizon had no comment on it. They directed them to ask Apple about it. So I wonder if Verizon even knew that was happening. I wonder if this was just something Apple did, for whatever reason, gave that, put a SIM card reader in all of, or a SIM card, SIM chip, slot in all of the iPhone 5s and didn't even mention it to Verizon that, hey, by the way, this might be just a side effect. They might not have even considered the outcome of that.
If that happened to Verizon completely unawares, then shame on them.
Well, but, if you're Verizon, you got to be like, Apple's saying, hey, the new iPhone 5's coming out. Do you want it? And the answer isn't, well, does it have a SIM slot in it? The answer is, yes, please.
That's true. And Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, they don't support the iPhone. Apple directly supports the iPhone, so that's fair enough.
Right.
That's fair enough. So, all in all, the hoopla and waiting in line for this device, I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah.
Although it's sold out.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's any place right now that you can get your hands on an iPhone 5 at typical cost, and I say typical cost because you can get them on eBay for probably around $1,500 if you want to pay that much for it. But if you're willing to wait for, I think the latest was, what, 3 weeks, you can get your hands on another.
Well, and so the next big hoopla that's happening is everyone speculating about the new iPad mini, which is supposed to be coming out soon. There's been no official announcement about it yet, but everyone assumes that it's coming. Supposedly it's going to be a version of the iPad, except it'll be smaller. It's supposed to have a 7.85-inch screen on it, so it'll be more like some of the Android tablet-type devices we've been seeing. And there's a lot of discussion in the forums right now about the price point on it. A new member named Lily5689 made a really good post about it that I'll put in the show notes of the show. And he talks about that and says that since the iPod is already at the $299 point, they have to make this around the $350 point or more. So he expects it to be somewhere around $350 or $399 just for that reason alone. And it's hard to compete when you're looking at, similar devices through Android that's $150 less. And he says if it wasn't for Apple, no other company would be able to get away with that. And he said that millions of loyal customers can be completely ignorant about the competition and buy the iPad mini regardless, and that Steve Jobs will certainly not be spinning in his grave, but probably smiling.
Yeah, I generally agree with that comment that millions would buy the iPad mini, but those millions already own the full iPad version, the 10-inch version. I don't think that there are going to be hordes willing to get the 7-inch version. I like 7-inch tablets for e-readers. I love my Nexus, but I think the iPad mini is going. If there is an iPad mini, it's going to be targeting a new market for Apple, not the same market for Apple.
Well, I guess time will tell. We'll see how it comes out, and if all these rumors are true. People always love their Apple rumors.
So if those rumors are true, at $350, that's $150 above both the new Kindle Fire HD and the Nexus 7. That's nothing to snort at. $150, I can get you a couple things at the grocery store.
Couple gallons of gas.
Right, a couple gallons of gas.
All right, well, thank you very much. We're going to try and do this again here in about a week, and we'll keep you up to date with the latest news, and maybe we'll do some reviews. So in the meantime, go to techguy.org or go directly to techguy.tv to see past episodes and the show notes, and subscribe to us on YouTube, iTunes, and wherever you happen to find us. We'll see you next time.